Writers of a text are a lot like Jumpman. Writers have a situation they're writing within. They must work within that situation in order to achieve their purposes. And along the way, they must overcome certain obstacles presented by their situation. And where possible, they must utilize whatever advantages the situation provides. Let's take a look now at some rhetorical constraints within a text. And for this, I want to look back at Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Think back to his rhetorical situation. Given what we've already studied about his situation, what then are some rhetorical obstacles that Martin Luther King Jr. faces within his situation? In other words, what are some of the conditions of his situation? That is, who he is, what his message is, who his audience is, when and where he is speaking. What are some of those elements that are making it difficult to achieve his particular purpose? Well, for one thing, we could say that his message may be disagreeable to some people in his audience. Remember, there's a lot of white supremacy in America, has been for a long time. So many in his audience, many listening, probably liked the way things were and didn't want to change the social order that placed white people in greater power over people of color. Another obstacle may be that his message may seem irrelevant to some in his audience. There are probably a lot of people listening that just don't have empathy toward the struggle of black Americans because white people, to the white people listening, they don't go through the same thing that black Americans had to go through. Another obstacle is perhaps this message may seem unrealistic to some in his audience. Black Americans have historically never been treated equally, and many may believe that the social hierarchy that places white people on top and people of color down below, maybe they believe that just cannot ever change, that there would always be too much opposition to actually fix this problem. Another obstacle would be that some in the audience just may not listen to King based on who he was. He was, after all, a hated public figure among conservatives at the time because he was proposing radical changes to the status quo in America. What about rhetorical advantages? Are there any advantages that Martin Luther King draws from within his situation? In other words, what are some of the conditions of his situation, who he is, what his message is, who his audience is, when and where he's speaking, that might be actively helping him achieve his purpose? Well, for one, his message is an inherently sympathetic one, at least to those people who believe black people are people. And that's because his message is all about equality, and equality is a selfless and righteous thing to advocate for. It's also a big part of America's founding principles. And so, on some level, to everybody listening, his message is inherently sympathetic. Of course, this calls into question how sympathetic it might be. Remember, some in his audience are racist and believe that black people don't deserve the same sort of considerations that white people deserve, and so it's going to be sympathy, varying levels of sympathy. Another rhetorical advantage is that King himself is just an inherently sympathetic and admirable figure, unless, of course, you were one of the American conservatives at the time that felt directly threatened by him and his movement. But for everyone else, he's deeply sympathetic and admirable. He was a Southern minister, and so he has that kind of automatic virtue that comes with that position. He had, throughout his life, endured death threats, physical violence, police harassment, and yet here he is still speaking out on behalf of this movement he believes in.